So, since this project is on environmental issues, environmental racism is the disproportionate impact of environmental hazards on people of color, and environmental justice is the movement's response to environmental racism. It refers to institutional rules, regulations, policies, or government slash corporate decisions that deliberately target certain communities. Um, and the best examples of this in Louisville would probably be Smoketown or Butchertown. And there also was a history of dumping in the West End, especially in the Portland area. So it's definitely happened here. And I chose to focus on transportation. Transportation is important to all aspects of health, primarily because it's how you access everything, especially your groceries, your job, your child care if you have children, and healthcare as well. You can't get to the doctor if you can't get there. And studies have shown that when people have long transit routes and multiple transfers, or they have problems paying the bus fare, they don't have access to healthy food or health care, and they're less likely to be taking care of themselves the way that they should be. So, as far as this relates to the book, um, the dimensions of time I chose were the historical era because we live in sort of a post-racial, like quote unquote post-racial society, and people often don't want to confront racial issues. They want to pretend that it's not racial. Um, and for the environmental dimension, I chose communities because we're talking about entire communities of people of color and minorities that are affected by transportation justice issues. And I also threw in that low income people are affected as well, but often there's that overlap between people of color and low income people. And that's also because of redlining, which I'll address later in this. Um, and for the biological perspective, I put that transportation issues affect health outcomes, and it does affect your ability to access healthcare services and your ability to acquire healthy food on a regular basis. There are a lot of food deserts in Louisville, primarily in Russell and California and the Shawnee neighborhoods, if you're familiar with those areas. And lots of these areas don't have any doctor's offices at all. If they do, they're not very good doctor's offices, not doctor's offices you would choose to go to if you had a choice. And the effects on the quality of life, that's primarily job related because your job obviously determines your quality of life. How much income you have determines your housing and your access to healthcare and all of these things, and your what kind of food you eat. And lots of employers, especially in Louisville, I'm focusing on Louisville here, they're not served by TARC, or if they are served, they're not served during the times that you would need to be there to work. And there's lots of studies out there that show that automobile access is a stronger predictor of the labor market outcomes. And the average commute times in Louisville are generally low across the board. 67% of the workforce uses less than 25 minutes to travel to work, whereas those who use public transportation report that it takes 45 minutes or longer, and 36% reported that they commute over an hour to work each way on the bus. And that's pretty true because I do use the bus, and I work, I'd say about a mile and a half away from where I live. And if I take the bus, it takes me about an hour and 20 minutes between the walk time and the transfer. Whereas if I were to walk, it would take me maybe 45 minutes. Um, and then focusing on the neighborhoods themselves. I don't know how many of you are familiar with redlining, but I wanted to just touch on it. Um, and redlining is the practice of denying loans in certain neighborhoods because of socioeconomic characteristics instead of the physical design or structural characteristics of the buildings themselves. And the Homeowners Loan Corporation, HOLC, was created in 1933 to aid the housing market during the Great Depression. And they're the ones that created these HOLC maps that graded neighborhoods on a scale of A through D. And usually neighborhoods with people of color were graded C's or D's. So they weren't able to access mortgage insurance or credit for decades. And it was only discontinued in 1951, but the disinvestment has continued, and that's why you see a lot of lower income, predominantly black neighborhoods. If you guys are from Louisville, you know there's the 9th Street divide where everything past 9th Street on the west end of 9th Street is considered the West End, and the property values are very low. And it's like that in Russell and Shawnee in California and Smoketown. And there are a few other neighborhoods that are predominantly black, but they've been devalued because of these HOLC maps. And there are some around U of L, actually. There's a neighborhood called Limerick next to Old Louisville that's been really devalued. And there is a map, if you can see the link at the bottom here, there's a map of redlining in Louisville if you're curious. And problems with TARC specifically in Louisville, the My TARC cards that were just introduced, I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with how the transit system here works, but you wait at the bus stop and you get on, you either have a paper ticket that you've purchased somewhere, you have a pass that you show them, or you have cash, and the fare is $1.75. So TARC decided to get rid of cash. They're still giving you the option to pay in cash, but they're trying to get people to use the My TARC cards. And the card itself costs money, and you're only able to load it at a store or through auto draft on your bank account, which not everybody has. And they are eliminating tickets long term, and lots of social workers give out TARC tickets to their clients to get them back and forth to appointments, especially homeless service providers. So there's not a budget for purchasing every client their own TARC card because they cost over $5 a piece. And if they're lost, they're lost. And back in August when they changed the routes every 6 months. They restructure them. I don't know what they base that off of, but they reduce service on the 19 and the 23 specifically, and those serve from Riverport to Park Duval for the 19 and Shawnee Park to the East End and some other areas on the 23. The 23 actually goes to one goes to DuPont Circle, one goes to Newburgh-Fagenbush, there's one that goes through J-Town. So this is also how a lot of people get to their doctor's appointments, and service was decreased in August, and a lot of people called out TARC on social media, and they were like, these are black neighborhoods. Shawnee Park is predominantly black, and they mysteriously restored the service in September. So my social media campaign, I was curious to see how many people were waiting for the bus and for how long, because the buses have been running very, very late, or buses have just not been running at all. So I started this Facebook page. As you can see, I got jokes. Our public transportation machine's broken right now. But I told people to use the hashtag Where's My TARC and to say where they were, their race, which bus was late, and how late their bus was, if they knew, to highlight the racial and geographic disparities in bus service. So I got about 118 posts between Twitter and Facebook, and 42% of the posts were from people in Shawnee Park / California, sometimes Russell, and they were usually waiting on the 23. 18% of the people were downtown, and that's usually where people transfer their bus routes because almost all of them converge downtown. 12% were from just different areas with limited bus service, like J-Town and St. Matthews. I know the bus only runs once an hour in St. Matthews, and they were trying to catch buses that serve predominantly black areas because the only bus that goes through that neighborhood of St. Matthews goes from Shawnee Park to Springhurst. And someone else was trying to catch the 40 that goes from 8th and Main downtown to J-Town. 87% of the people self-identified as black or African American. 11% identified as another minority, usually Hispanic. There were some Asian people in there, and 2% identified as white out of all of the posts. So that's all I've got.